Hi, this is Rex from universalexports.co, bringing you a fortnightly podcast called A Story to Tell. In this series, we hear from an eclectic group of people whose only connection is through being a member of the Camberwell Petanque Club. By research, gentle prodding, and sometimes coercion, these guests unfold a labyrinth of achievements, disappointments, and surprises. You may be inspired, shocked, or even doubtful, but you will be enthralled. And your turn is coming, so get ready for that tap on the shoulder because everyone has a story to tell. Our next guest, a member of the Camberwell Petanque Club, is someone who is recognised for his creations and inventions, such as his Boule chute returner, his string line cleaners, Boule to jack distance measurer, and many others. You may be aware of his involvement in music, particularly through his afro-cuban drums, although you probably don't know where he got that rhythm. Or that he played A-grade football in what is now the AFL. He is responsible for utterly destroying a courier. He represented the EPA at VCAT and is an avid environmentalist who has written many papers and articles on that subject. Elephants, house cows, billy carts. He has a story to tell. This is Max Thomas.
Thank you, Rex.
Well, those fantastic rhythms you just heard came from our next guest. Most people know him as Max, but his real name is John William Maxwell Thomas. Now, Max, 4 given names is a bit hard to handle. Was that ever a problem for you?
Well, I think I can... Should I blame Mum or should I give her the credit? She was a very literate person. The reason why she's given me John William was after her dad, who sadly perished on the Burma Railway. They had a friend called Max. She liked Max. I've never been called John William, but in honour of my grandfather, I've borne up bravely through the years. But the thing is, having those names, with the advent of digital technology, we can have terabytes of memory, but you can't have 3 names, except on your passport.
Max, that rhythm that we just had on those drums was just fantastic. Music is a very big part of your life. Where did the rhythm originally come from?
Well, my dad was a steam engine driver on the Gippsland line. We used to pester him, Dad, can we come with you to work? Because we loved to be on the footplate, waving out the window and blowing the whistle when we went across the level crossings, watching the other kids green with envy. But the rhythm of those engines, especially in 6/8 time, couldn't help myself.
I can imagine that, and that leads on to more in the music world. We'll get to that a little bit later. You were born in Traralgon. Your house was on a very lovely hill. But what happened to that hill?
Well, it became a power station, better known as Loy Yang. My mum's family migrated from the UK back in the 20s. They took up some pretty poor land, and eventually along came the State Electricity Commission and said, we want that, we're having that, and it became a power station.
And what was life like in those early days down there, Max?
Well, very interesting. We were on the edge of town. Across the road was the remnants of the Gippsland Plains red gums. Interestingly enough, I just mentioned my grandfather dying on the Burma Railway. One of the sappers that he was imprisoned with turned out to be a contractor to clear red gums from the Gippsland Plains. Imagine it now, little kids running around watching with great delight this sapper, who, by the way, said to me one day when we were having a quiet time, your grandfather didn't die on his own. But anyway, leaving that aside, watching these magnificent explosions and red gums shimmering before they dropped was something. Wouldn't happen today. Giant swing saws. Here, son, you can keep these oiled. This thing, diameter of about, well, in the old money, probably about 6 or 8 feet, swirling around and chugging away like the steam engines, and, well, you can guess the rest.
Being out in the bush like that, you've got to be a bit self-reliant. You must have learned a lot about fishing and looking after yourself and that sort of thing down there. Your father was an instrumental part in training you in a lot of those things, in your self-reliance.
He certainly was. We used to do all sorts of wonderful things, go down to the railway loco sheds, as they were called. People call them roundhouses, but the old engine drivers, they were loco sheds. Anyway, we'd go out the back and we'd get some white metal that came from replacing the bearings on the steam engines, and we'd melt those down and use those for sinkers in the backyard, no problem at all. Dad was very instrumental in teaching me about fishing. Sort of incidentally, you learned a bit about the environment while you're at it. Spent a lot of time wandering up and down the Traralgon Creek. That was before Loy Yang came along and wrecked it. It was a well-known stream.
And while you were walking up and down there, what happened that day when this old ute came up?
Well, Dad was pretty keen on surf fishing too later on. We heard this old ute chugging up behind us. Anyway, this fellow gets out behind us and he says, "Would you like a lift, Billy?" Dad looks at me, hardly looked at his friend. He said, "No, open your own bloody gates."
Your father gave you a lot of sage advice too, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he did. One of the things he said was, "Now, son, don't ever let your petrol gauge get above empty." And that puzzled me for years and years. I finally worked out that, and he confirmed, the thing is, if your fuel gauge looks low and you pick somebody up, they might buy you a gallon of petrol. Wow. To get where they want to go.
Yeah. It wasn't all petrol engines and steam engines, there were still horses and carts, various commercial people. Remember those?
Yeah. Well, up and down our road, there was the baker and his cart, various tinkers, the iceman. We used to love jumping on the back of the ice cart. The bloke up the front, we used to spring carts. As soon as the kid got on the back, the front of the cart would come up and he'd say, "Get off there." And the rabbito, he'd come along. I never ever figured out what he'd say, but he'd say something like, "Here the rabbit, here the rabbit." I think that's probably meant, "Here's the rabbits." And the baker, don't forget the baker. These huge loaves of bread.
And when you're in that situation, you learn to make do and recycle your own stuff for your own purposes. What happened one day when you made a billy cart?
Oh, we made billy carts all the time. Usually that was an adventure. We'd go to the rubbish tip, which was way down the other end of the road, not far from Loy Yang Power Station actually, and we'd salvage bits and pieces. And one day we had a convoy, billy carts, lined up like wagons going west. We got home, we had all this collection of old tyres and all sorts of stuff. I think Dad wasn't all that pleased. We had to take it all back up the dip again.
How did a brother-in-law's cow get involved in this stuff?
Oh dear, oh dear. Well, my friend, I think he'll forgive me if he's still with us, Bluey Radford, a wild Irishman, and that's the other thing about the area we were, a lot of loggers. Just about everybody was a logger. Right. We learned a lot from those people because they had to improvise. But anyway, Bluey and I decided we were going to make a bike. Bluey had the brilliant idea of putting a steering wheel on the bike.
As you would.
Of course. Anyway, we were on the way to the Traralgon Creek and home. Bluey lost control because the steering wheel he hadn't quite got right. Steering wheel spun uselessly. We careered into the fence of my future brother-in-law's family home. They had a house cow. And I remember being catapulted across the fence off Bluey's bike and landing quite close to the house cow, who seemed to be quite unamused. But she didn't harm me. She could have. House cows can be a bit temperamental.
And you used to have to collect the milk from this cow?
That was a different cow.
All right.
Quite a few cows around that area. It was my job to not only cut the wood and various other things, because being the oldest boy and having 3 names, well, that quite distinguished. Off I'd go down to one of the loggers' places, Old Pato. Belonged more in the 19th century, Old Pato. They used to milk their cow daily, and I'd go home with this quart pot of milk, and I'd get home. One night they discovered the cream was missing off the top of the milk. They challenged me, thinking I'd drunk the milk on the way home, and Pato confirmed it. But I can tell you now on oath that I didn't drink the cream.
So what happened to the cream?
Oh, old Pato was separating that. He had a separator out in his shed. Oh. And he'd be separating the cream off the milk and then selling us the skim. Anyway, that's what happened to the milk. I think my parents preferred to trust me because old Pato was notorious.
What's this elephant and postman story?
Most country towns enjoy a circus. I can recall one occasion where the circus came to Traralgon and we'd all go and enjoy watching them bathing the elephants in the creek. This day we watched the elephants and we followed them back to the showgrounds, and this elephant was tethered to an axle, a vehicle axle, was driven into the ground and the elephant was chained to this. Unthinkable. Anyway, this elephant was circling around the axle looking for something to eat, I expect. And, of course, by this time there's a circle of schoolboys just out of reach of the elephant's radius, except for one who turned up on his brand new posties bike. This kid was a couple of years older than us, so we all made way, and he started circling the elephant on his brand new PMG bike, and the elephant seemed to take exception to this, but he didn't realise the distance from the axle to his bike was diminishing as he circled, and we, of course, followed the circle inwards, so he had no escape. And the elephant took particular exception to his shiny new cap, whipped it off his head, threw the bike on the ground, stomped all over the bike. This fellow was very lucky to escape with his life. Most of us knew through football that one of the players was the postmaster's son, and we knew his father was quite an aggressive type. When we get together these days, we still have a laugh about how John must have gone back to the post office, tried to explain the smashed up bike and the crushed helmet, the crushed cap, I should say. Well, there was this elephant, Mr. Gray.
You won't believe what happened, but an elephant did this. Yeah, sure. And around this time, you would have come across swaggies as well.
Yeah, well, Mum was very generous in that way. If they'd grown up during the Depression and they knew hard times, someone came to the door. She seemed to have an ability to size people up, and she would give them something to eat, something kind to say to them and send them on their way. Other than swaggies, in a country town, there are places you go and places you don't go. One of those places was a hill outside of town, and I guess it was the same in many other towns, where Aborigines on their way through, they had a traditional pathway from the Warrandyte area, let's say, through Gippsland. They'd skirt around the big swamps and they'd go to Lake Tyers after that was established. Generally, a lot of the roads and telegraph lines in Gippsland follow what I think were Aboriginal seasonal migration trails. We'd get Aboriginal children coming to school. My memory was that they would be there for a couple of weeks, maybe even less time than that. They usually excelled at sports. Great little football players, for instance. And we see now that there are plenty of Aborigines playing at the top level, and they're wonderful players.
And what was school like for you down there at that time? Primary school?
Primary school. My earliest memory of going to primary school had to go across town because only one primary school in the place. And I remember holding hands going across the railway bridge and this huge flood hurtling underneath. Still remember it. Funny how you can remember things after all that time. Yeah, that was the 1952 Great Flood.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. And then secondary school, how'd you go there?
Well, primary school, just to round that off, I was quite successful at primary school, but then going to secondary school and all these mysterious... So all of a sudden there was A squared plus B squared equals C squared. What the hell is all this about? How is this going to help me? It was a bit of a mystery. I was more distracted looking out the window and thinking there could be rabbits up on that hill.
That wasn't where you started to get involved with football at all, was it?
No, not at school. I didn't get picked in the teams at all.
Is that right?
No. It was very cliquey. Wasn't an expression we would have used at the time, but no. The teams were picked on the basis of who was popular and who wasn't.
So how did you start playing football?
Well, I left secondary school early. As it turns out, one of Pato's sons, and there were a few of them, he'd been playing footy with the Traralgon Rovers. Well, this was under 16s or under 14s perhaps even. And he said, we'd been playing paddock football quite a lot. And by the way, avoiding Bluey Radford because Bluey couldn't play football, but he was as strong as a lion. So we used to avoid old Bluey. But he got picked because we weren't game not to. And anyway, Pato says to me, why don't you come and have a game with the Rovers? So off we go. didn't want to play with the Police Boys Club because Sergeant Bryden, I think he was a spotter for the motor wreckers. He was always trying to get me to go and play for the Police Boys Club. I thought, no, not interested in the Police Boys Club. I'll go give this Rovers lot a go. So off I went. Found I had a talent for it, even though I'd done all right in the paddock. Right. You know, we didn't think that we'd be good enough to play in a team. But off we go, and yeah, I did quite well at it and thought, this is for me.
One of the opponents' teams, they were coached by a former captain of Carlton Football Club.
Oh, this was much later. We won the premiership with the juniors and the Rovers before that, and then I got promoted to the under-18s when I was still only 16, and then found myself playing in the senior side for Traralgon, leaping around and doing all sorts of things. There was a huge policeman. He couldn't play footy much, but he just said, look, son, I'll look after you. You just run around and do what you do, which is what I did. And we ended up playing against Morwell, who was coached by Graham Donaldson, who'd been a Carlton captain. He must have decided I was doing well enough to introduce me to Carlton.
So that's how the association with Carlton began?
Well, really, I'd been approached by a number of league sides at that time. It was a question of deciding which one to go to, really. They seemed to be going places. It was Barassi's first year there, and they had all sorts of things lined up. You could continue your education, they'd support you, they'd provide you accommodation, and they had a training program mapped out, even down to diets and all the rest of it, whereas some other clubs were still steeped in the 50s and, you know, you just sank or swam.
You had a friend who played with in Latrobe Valley, Ted Hopkins. Did you two end up at Carlton at the same time?
Well, he came a year later than me. In fact, I was supposed to be involved in inducing Teddy to go to Carlton, but it didn't quite work out that way. Besides, I recall thinking, well, even if I get involved in this, how am I going to buy Teddy lunch? I haven't got any money.
Didn't they pay big money then?
No, they certainly did not pay big money. Well, as I said, though, they looked after you. They paid for your accommodation, and that was all good.
Did they pay for your shoes?
Well, actually, I turned up at Princes Park. I'm running around in a pair of old Dunlop Bollies. Barras thought that they weren't really up the right sort of standard. He said, but you get yourself something to wear. Anyway, I go down to Lygon Street, which had fruit shops and bakers and all sorts of businesses. Now it's just a restaurant strip. But anyway, I went into a shoe shop thinking I might be able to afford something in there, and there was a lovely old Italian man who was a crazy Carlton supporter, and he must have recognised me because I'd had my picture in the paper and all the rest of it. I picked out a pair of shoes and thought I couldn't afford them. And he said, don't you worry, you pay nothing. You pay for nothing.
Wow.
Very generous man.
How fantastic was that? And then you were selected to play in 1966?
Yep, I got in the first game against Richmond at Princes Park. Did okay. I was told, people remember Boule Richardson, Matthew's father, don't let him hand pass, because he was the originator of handball, fast handball. Anyway, there's Boule. And I see him, he's going to handball, so I take a flying leap at him and I hear snap. And later discovered that I'd broken his thumb.
Oh.
And I was working in a garage in Oakley at the time, a Ford dealership. And I used to go to Boule Richardson's sandwich shop in Oakley. And the Monday morning, I'm dreading going over there to get my sandwich. I walked in the shop and there's Boule Richardson. He's got his wrist all bound up. And he just looked at me, he said, don't worry, son, these things happen.
How did you find it in that top level, being in the company of heroic figures?
Well, it's very interesting. 1 minute, it seems you're worshipping these people. The next minute, you're running around on the paddock with them. I imagine it's the same thing in show business or anywhere else. That the big thing, and people often say, whether they're Olympians or what, you've got to come to a position where you think, do I really belong here? And you have to answer that question in the affirmative, otherwise there's no future. But what I should say, going back to the first game against Richmond, the siren didn't work. And I remember running around.
Still going on?
This game's still going. We kicked 2 goals after the siren and almost took it off Richmond, and the supporters of Richmond are notoriously volatile, and they invaded the ground because they thought, we've got to put an end to this, otherwise they're going to snatch the game from us.
My goodness.
And the last thing I remember about it was sensing. You know how you sense something behind you? I look around and here's this horse looking me in the face in the middle of Princes Park. they had sent a police officer out onto the ground to tell the umpires that the game was over.
Great. Amazing. You played well enough to be selected in the following week against St Kilda.
I did. Oh, well, it was very exciting. I mentioned I worked at a garage in Oakley. They wouldn't give me any time off, so here I am still working at midday on Saturday and had to play in a senior game at Moorabbin. I hardly knew my way around the city, and I was driving an old Ford Prefect, which I spent more time under than inside, and I wasn't sure it was going to get me there. By the time I got to Moorabbin, they were getting a bit anxious. Where have you been? Kind of thing. Anyway, we get there. The first thing I noticed was the ground was very soggy and it wasn't very wet. St Kilda won the flag that year, and a lot of people will tell you they won it because not only were they a very talented team, which they were, but they water the ground so it would bring anybody else back to the field. And why that's relevant is because somewhere in the second quarter of the match, I was running straight towards the boundary and I had a couple of quite... well, I say Carl Dittrich. I'll say Carl Dittrich. He was quite a big fellow and he's pretty volatile. I knew he was right behind me, so I did some sort of fancy move near the boundary, but unfortunately, and I can still hear the crunching sound as I twisted my knee, and that was it.
So you were taken off?
No, I wasn't, because in that time there was no interchange. So I had to stay on, and they said, well, you can go and stand at full forward, try and take a mark and kick a goal. But by the time I went in at half time, my knee had swollen to the extent where later on I couldn't even get my jeans on because my knee had swollen so much. So I wasn't taken off. I had to stay on the ground and probably did a lot more damage than otherwise would have been the case. The other thing is things happen so bloody fast.
Yes.
That's the thing. You're used to doing things, and because if you're excelling at those lower levels, when you get with these guys, one of the things that happens is when you run out to take a pass, it hits you there, and that makes you a better player. The surface is better. Everything gravitates in that direction. It's not easy to actually come to that understanding, and the pace, it's just so much faster.
So was this the beginning of the end of your football career?
I had several operations and stayed on at Carlton, played a couple of games in the twos and a couple of night games. And the club doctor, and I spent a lot of time in his company, he also happened to be the medical officer at Kodak at East Coburg, yeah. Yep. Well, he would have realised that this boy can't really make a big career of football because of the injury. And he said, I'm going to get you a cadetship in applied chemistry at Kodak. Don't let me down.
Was that of interest to you?
Well, I was in the motor game at the time, and I knew that wasn't really my thing. Yep. I was looking for something else, but I hadn't really thought about applied chemistry.
And obviously had a challenge to it as well for you.
Well, I had people saying to me, oh, no, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. Fortunately, my wife at the time, who no longer with us, she had the wisdom to say, well, I think you can do better than what you're doing. Have a go.
So suddenly you're working with professional scientists. How did it go, and where did it go from there?
Well, yeah, I had a chance. I mentioned before that I spent a fair bit of time with the loggers and what have you. They were improvisers. They knew how to make things work. I guess I learned a lot from them. But when I got to Kodak, there were opportunities to work with people who really understood how things work, and I thought, this is for me, and managed over time. I think I must have impressed the management there because I made several innovations that were adopted internationally in the photographic business. And when I say photographic business, I'm talking about the basic photochemistry. That is the manufacture of emulsions for
coatings on film.
Yeah, for coatings on film or paper or even X-ray. Interesting little aside there too, during that time the French were doing nuclear testing in the Pacific. We had to walk through water ramps and so-called man cleaners because even a speck of radioactive dust wouldn't go well on an X-ray.
Well, 6 degrees of separation again. You were in the emulsion coating area. Probably at that time I was in my career as a photographer, so I would have been using film that you actually helped produce.
I certainly would have. I was mainly concerned with Ectacolour paper. That is what people get when they submit their film from the camera into a process work or well, should I say even Kodak, or there are plenty of perhaps businesses like yours, Rex, where you'd print and distribute the photographs back to people. I was involved in the manufacture of emulsions, which get coated onto paper.
Just out of interest, how wide were those sheets? I mean, I know them as 8x10s.
Well, we were coating it 1 metre wide, and we were coating 6 layers simultaneously, and you can imagine the issues there with keeping the different coloured layers separate. Lots of chemistry and physics involved in all that, but we coated at 100 metres a minute, and we coated my product, extra colour paper, the last year I was there, we coated enough of that 1 metre wide paper to go all the way around Australia.
If things went wrong though, they'd really go wrong on a line like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, with photographic emulsions, they only had a limited life. They stored in large kettles and then they gravitate down to the coating machine. In the middle of the night, we didn't have any computer aids. It was just people would produce what's called sensitometric curves. And I'd be woken up at 2 a.m. and people would start blurting out all these deviated data from these curves, and you're still half asleep and you think, well, if I keep on going, I'll get there in the morning and they'll say, you've been coating rubbish all night, millions of dollars. It's like a waterfall of dollars. But if I stop and it turns out that the product was within spec, because you only ever know what's gone on 20 minutes later, and it's all happening in the dark, you can make the right decision or the wrong decision. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
You had other problems while you were at Kodak. There was a plumber's strike, wasn't there?
Well, indeed there was. One of the main ingredients in photography at that time was silver. Imagine dropping great loads of bullion into nitric acid and producing silver nitrate, which is what photosensitive material consists of. Anyway, the plumbers at Kodak decided that they'd had enough of their dispute with the management, so they pulled down the retort, which is where the silver nitrate gets manufactured, and they went on strike. This went on for 6 weeks. Well, I've got a mortgage and a young family. What am I going to do? Like my colleagues, we start looking for work. Ended up working on the waterfront, and that was an education. You'd be loading ships' containers and you'd say, well, why does a ship's container from Adelaide, which has got to go to both Sydney and Hobart, they stack them the wrong way around so that the whole thing has to be unloaded and then reloaded. They're making work for people. You get picked up as a casual labourer, you give your name as Mickey Mouse or something. Along came a huge gorilla with a clipboard in his hand, and you want to join the union? Oh yes, he'd say. But then he'd see you lifting 2 cans of coffee at once. You're putting a man out of work, he'd say. And you know that if you don't comply, you're going to end up in the drink. Yeah. This was pretty hot. This is around just after Christmas. There'd be blokes walking off the wharf with greatcoats on, jangling as they went, with all sorts of contraband. Nobody asked any questions. We certainly didn't. One of the other jobs that we had was moving furniture.
Oh, yeah.
And all that was enough to convince me that that wasn't a career, an alternative career. I thought Kodak will eventually come back, make a comeback. But ultimately, of course, they didn't. They made the ultimate exit. So furniture moving wasn't for me. Laying turf at Moonee Valley Racecourse, that was a lot of fun. Learned a lot there. And what else would we... delivering Christmas hampers. That was another thing. Right. Some of those women in the eastern suburbs, my goodness.
Around this time, you're married, you're a family man, and you've actually been playing footy again in the Diamond Valley League.
I did. Well, we had a mortgage like everybody else. I went to Greensborough Football Club as a contract player, spent several years there. Won their Best and Fairest award a couple of times. We never played in a premiership side, but interestingly, one day at Ringle Park, we were playing in a final and we were leading comfortably at half-time. My mind goes back to the good old Carlton days when Teddy Hopkins was the hero of the 1970 grand final. Collingwood was celebrating at half-time. They were leading by 6 goals. Same thing with Greensborough, celebrating at half-time, some of the supporters, and I couldn't help thinking, this is where Collingwood gets their players from. And sure enough, down we went.
And you wanted to raise the kids in the country.
Well, fortunately for me, during that time at Kodak, they released me for studies. I'm qualified in applied chemistry, and I thought, well, I want to get back to the country. I like the kids to grow up in the country environment. I decided, well, I've got the chemistry. What'll get me back to the bush? Oh no, I'll do ag science. Accepted a position with the old Latrobe Valley Water and Sewerage Board, just working in the laboratories. As it turns out, the Environment Protection Authority had a delegated agency in Gippsland, and the agency was the Water and Sewerage Board.
You studied agricultural science.
Yes, I did.
You ended up writing guidelines for recycled water irrigation.
Yeah, I did. It was interesting because the Environment Protection Authority had a policy whereby treated wastewater, or we call it recycled water these days, is to be disposed to land rather than into waterways. It struck me that the EPA, it was very metrocentric, still is. They didn't have any sort of agricultural science skills on board. So I thought, here's an opportunity for me. If we're going to use this stuff on land, we really ought to know something about agriculture. Sure. So that's how I got into it.
You have your diploma of agriculture. You've written articles in an organisation called Open Forum, 54 articles since 2016, Max.
Well, that's on a variety of subjects. Yeah, I like to give a bit of cheek.
And I do recommend anyone have a look at those. They're really quite fascinating. You represented EPA at VCAT.
Several times, yes. And it's ironic, really, we were talking about recycled water. I can remember there was one particular instance where there was a proposal to recycle water by irrigation of pasture near the Gippsland Lakes. There were a lot of objections from environmentalists, strangely, who now recommend recycling water, even in cases, I should say, where it's not appropriate.
How things change.
They certainly do. At that time, though, I was feeling quite stressed because we had I'd call it a watershed VCAT hearing coming along, and I was the lead witness. I went to a GP, an older fellow who was only working part-time as a locum. I told him the story of while I was feeling a bit stressed, and he couldn't believe that I was being hassled by environmentalists who were saying that we were going to pollute the Gippsland Lakes and all the rest of it. That was the opposite to what the intentions were. In fact, in this particular town, there'd been newspaper articles saying deaths lurking in the drains. And of course, this old GP, he'd seen waterborne disease, diphtheria, whooping cough, not only those, but polio as well. And there was a polio epidemic at Traralgon in the 50s, at which I'd remembered. Some of our friends had suffered from it. Yeah, so he was astonished that people would actually object to a sewerage scheme going in whereby these health threats would be eliminated.
Sure. You started mentoring younger people in water management and how it affects agriculture.
Certainly, yeah. One of the things that I used to say to some of the people that came to work with us was that they could go home feeling proud that they had provided a safe water supply and had been instrumental in managing wastewater in a way that was beneficial to the environment and economically productive.
You've got an involvement in Ghana?
Yes, I suppose that conflates music as well as agriculture, strangely. Yeah, a friend of mine who's a very accomplished musician, I've decided recently, because my hands have objected to over 50 years of punishment through playing percussion instruments, that I'd give most of my instruments to this fellow who does work in Ghana. He mentors people in Ghana. The idea was he'd take Australian musicians interested in that form of music to Ghana, where there's been a drift to the cities, a breakdown of their society in many ways and their culture. Ray takes them to Ghana, and they learn from the masters who benefit from sustaining their culture, and it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, a hugely generous act on your part, though, donating those instruments.
Well, also, Ray introduced me to a young Ghanaian man. Ray Pereira is his name. Many people would know him. He's a well-known musician around Melbourne. He very kindly has supported this young fellow and others through primary, secondary and university. And this young man is now an agronomist. They grow cashews, sugar, and they've got a distillery where they make rum. And I've been trying to encourage them to look at organic methods whereby they can have control over their fixed costs, and looking also at ethanol production.
Right.
They're looking into it, but I think They're price takers, and the European Union tends to squash anybody on the outside.
Sure. We've mentioned music, but only briefly. Tell me a little bit about the music. I'm aware of a recording made while you were down in Gippsland. Was that the height of your musical career there?
Well, I was involved in quite a few different lineups, mainly around Gippsland, but we did travel quite a bit. I had the good fortune to be in a band with a Maori gentleman, very gifted vocalist, and had quite a long track record. The story goes, in Maori culture, the oldest son is brought up by the grandparents, and Pinky was his name. He's no longer with us, but he was forced to study music while everybody else was doing whatever Maori kids do. He ended up travelling the world with a Maori youth orchestra. Australians tend to claim a lot of musicians that come over as our own. He's one of them. He ended up entertaining troops in Vietnam, also did a lot of work on cruise ships. Yeah, so I learned a lot from him, but we did a lot of weddings and seen a lot of interesting things at weddings, but perhaps we haven't got time to go into all of that.
But you've ended up going around the world with music. You've been to Cuba?
Yeah, I certainly did. Went to Cuba. Well, discovered that I didn't know anywhere near as much as I thought I knew. But they were very generous. They would let you sit in, and that was one of the highlights of my existence, really, I think, going there. And Sri Lanka, Morocco, South Africa, Zimbabwe, various places. Saw a lot of music in those places. In fact, music here tends to be something, I suppose, that sits alongside our existence, but it's central to their existence. They have work songs and all kinds of occasions. Well, I do remember in Zimbabwe playing with a band there was at Victoria Falls Hotel, I think. They gave me a part to play, and I thought I was doing okay. And then I started improvising. The whole band stopped, and they looked at me, "You play what we told you to play, nothing else." But if I can make a bit of an aside, one of those musicians, I think he spoke the Shona language, and he said he came from a tribe that lived by a lake, and they were sedentary people. They grew vegetables and caught fish, but they were visited annually by another tribe that were much more warlike. He said to me that they didn't want to get into any sort of dispute with these people. He said we would feed them so they will feel strong enough to go away.
Bringing things more up to date nowadays, you're partnered with Vicky.
Yes.
She's a professional artist.
She certainly is. She has it in her blood. I've been very fortunate to have met up with Vicky, and we get along extremely well. But sometimes when I see her capabilities, it has a way of moderating your opinion of yourself. When I say she has it in her blood, her grandfather won the Archibald no less than 7 times. Vicky teaches professionally at the Malvern Arts Society and also elsewhere, a couple of times a week, which gives her an opportunity to get away from me, really.
And if people do go to Open Forum and look up some of those earlier articles, the image that goes with the articles is actually a portrait that Vicky had done of you.
Yes, some people think it's a good likeness. Others, one old friend, another old musical friend, we'd lost contact. He'd moved up to Ballarat. He contacted Vicky and he said, when I came across this picture, I knew it was Max because, I miss him and I wanted to make contact with him. It was unmistakable. He said, yes, you've captured that slightly world-weary but optimistic expression.
She's done an excellent job. I have seen it. It's very, very good. You enjoy sports and activities, even though, like a lot of us, the body is starting to let you know that it's not always good fun. What do you enjoy most nowadays in the world of sport and general activity?
Well, I like cycling, but a recent protracted bout of vertigo has prevented me from cycling very much because you lose your balance.
It's not a good thing.
No, same with table tennis. I played table tennis at a fairly reasonable standard. No, nothing brilliant. I never played A grade. A reserve is about my limit. And canoeing, same thing. Balance. You really don't want to lose your balance in a canoe.
Not a lot, no.
Especially when the water's taller than you are.
What's that other funny game you play?
Now, what is that? Funny name, Petanque. No, we've really enjoyed Petanque. There's a flat section in front of my shed, Yarragon in Gippsland. We decided we'd have a go. When we discovered CPC, Camberwell Petanque Club, it's a marvellous facility and we've met some great people here and enjoy it very much.
Yeah. And you live by the Carlton Football Club motto, which is?
Mens sana in corpore sano.
And that means?
That means a sound mind in a sound body.
Max, your life has been full of variety and exciting things and led you up paths one way and another. What do you feel is your greatest achievement? Can you pin it down to one thing?
Well, I haven't mentioned my daughters. And I don't know whether that's an achievement, but any parent knows what you want really is to see them happy and successful.
Exactly.
And I've got two daughters, and one's a science editor and the other one is in the UK. She's struggled very hard and made a lot of sacrifices to achieve a position with the National Trust. I feel very proud of them, and I think family, when it comes down to it, what comes before family?
Well, that's right. With that question, apart from children, what do you think your greatest achievement is?
Well, I think being able to see opportunities and try and make something of it, warts and all, plenty of mistakes, very good at inventing new mistakes.
It's the only way you learn, isn't it? Going back to the earlier part, your father was a big influence on you. Is there anyone else that's been of huge influence in the way your life's turned out or what you've done during your life?
Oh, my mother. No doubt, no doubt. You mentioned the open forum rebels. Mum insisted on 5 of us, and she encouraged us to read and also to write, to investigate things, follow them through. If you don't understand something, try to come to grips with it. Don't just accept what's being put in front of you. Satisfy yourself that, well, there's a good old does that stand to reason test, and she was very good at that.
Here's one to throw at you. What do people most misunderstand about you?
It's more to do with me than them. I think I'm a more full-on sort of character to meet, perhaps even intimidating, that I haven't really appreciated, and I think it's had an effect here and there. People might not feel comfortable because they think I'm maybe even aggressive. I don't, it's hard to see yourself.
Exactly.
Well, I might even come across as being academic, but that's far from the truth. Education was not attractive to me. I couldn't see the point of it. If I was interested in something, I was good at it. If I wasn't interested in it, no.
Max, this has just been a fantastic journey through your life, everything that you've done, achieved and seen. Thank you very, very much for sharing it with us. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of interest out of this.
Well, I do hope so. Thank you, Rex.
All that talent and generosity from a boy from the bush. We, many others, and the environment are still benefiting from it. These are Max's beats you hear in the background on the instruments he donated to encourage others. Ask Max about his latest ingenious weed exterminator extractor thingy when you see him next. Thank you for joining us here at universalexports.co. Tune in a fortnight's time to meet our next guest, whose gripping tales of leaps of terror and broken wreckage will amaze you with his story to tell. Rex out.